fans, we are back. Cars are on track at St. Petersburg. We got Chase Holden in the house.
We
Woohoo!
here.
We
What's up?
here.
How we feeling today?
It's that time. INDYCAR is back. It's back on Fox. I have nothing but good things to say about Fox so far. I know there's been some haters out there. I've seen them. I don't get it. The
No.
content's been amazing, and I have to say, the new leaderboard. I'm a UI freak. Some of the guys on the call know that. The design language of the new leaderboard was needed many years ago. That was one of the first things I noticed. It felt like weight off my shoulders to see that the design of the new leaderboard overlay. So I'm happy. We're going to get in the show. We're here to talk about lineup strategy for your INDYCAR fantasy leagues. And INDYCAR is a little bit unique on our app compared to Formula One. It's the first year we've had INDYCAR leagues. F1 leagues lock at right before qualifying. With INDYCAR, we get to see all practice sessions, all qualifying sessions. So we're going to be talking probably high level today a little bit. We had one practice session that just ended, so we have some data to look at. But just keep in mind, anything we say, take it in the context of there's still 2 more practice sessions and qualifying to consider when you go lock your teams or fill out your full rosters before the race this Sunday. Before we get into some quick introductions, my name is Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of Grid Rival. With me today, I have Michael Ursinoli, our CTO, Ryan Booth, Director of Business Operations here, William Laddie, our Principal Software Engineer, and of course, the wonderful Chase Holden joining us as a guest for the second time. Thanks for being here, Chase.
I'm super excited.
Let's go into it. Let's get right into it. The way that we normally go over our strategy shows is we talk a lot about value and value change. And if you have played this game before, or if you are new and you have joined any of our new player sessions or paid attention and watched the game guides or read any of the rules about how the game works, you know that one of the most important things is building your team's value over the course of the season. And the primary function, really the only function, and the way that that happens is you find drivers that you think are undervalued. And so I think we're going to start the show today by all 5 of us, again, after only one practice session, talking about and testing in Sebring a couple weeks back, talking about who we think might be good picks on the leaderboard. And we will start with the inverse. We will talk about a mistake that we see a lot of people making, which is, and I can't say it's a bad move. I'm just saying you got to think about if you want to strategically do this, which would be signing the number 1 ranked driver, right? It can be at the first race of the year. It can be a little bit confusing, right? But think about it. If the point is to build value, and you sign the guy on the leaderboard who's worth $30 million, he can go up. But to do that, he has to earn the most fantasy points of the first race, which probably means he has to qualify first, he has to finish the race first, and no one else under him has to have an outstanding result and rack up a bunch of qualifying points or improvement points or points for laps led or all the other things you can get points for. So I'm going to go around, do a round robin. I'm going to start with one of the biggest values that I see on the leaderboard right now is my boy, Nolan. I think Nolan Siegel is probably one of the most underpriced drivers on the leaderboard. I am putting him on my team for 5 races. I typically, as some of you guys on the call know, I'm not usually a 5 race guy. I'm like, if you were to look at my contract lengths over the last couple of years playing this game, as like a correlation chart, you'd see a lot of 3s and 4s. So when I sign a 5 races, because I believe somebody has a lot of upside, and I think he's going to be one of probably the best picks, or I'll say he has the potential to be one of the most undervalued picks the whole season, in my personal opinion. I don't know if anybody wants to push back, if anyone agrees, and then I'll hand the floor over to some of y'all who you'd add to that list.
As far as underpriced drivers go, I really like Siegel as well, but it would be boring if we all said Siegel, so I'm going to say somebody else.
Okay.
I'm intrigued by Christian Rasmussen, like based on this one practice session.
Yes.
Like I think Ed Carpenter Racing came out pretty strong out of the gate with all the changes this year, and yeah, I'd like to see what Rasmussen can do this weekend, and he is quite the bargain right now on the app. So if he can keep up even this mid-pack result, it's going to be big for him in terms of both value gains and points. So he's my sleeper at the moment.
Yeah, I'll take one from the top because I feel like that's hard, right?
It is hard.
Yeah, the top price drivers, like how could you really get value there, right? But part of the strategy is you want a podium contender on your team, right? You're not hunting for value to the point where you have no one who has a chance of getting on the podium or even top 5. So I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'm not going Polo for race 1. I'm really liking Pato Award. Sorry, for underpriced. So he's at 21.6 million, currently ranked 7th on the app. From the bonus points, there's a really good chance that he does get the best on team points. Not that many points, but I'll take the extra points where we can get it. So I like Pato Award. I think there's other value right above him, right below him, but I like Pato Award right now for where we're at.
Yeah, Pato, I'll say this much. We talked a little bit about it on Race Bets yesterday, and while I do want to follow up and say that Nolan and Pato, I think, are great value, I'm going to kind of go in the middle area. A pick that I do have going into this week, and a guy that kind of just proved why he P6 in practice 1 or P7, sorry, Marcus Armstrong. With Meyer Shank Racing. I really like him here at 11.8 million. He, I know that Felix, I think, had an accident in the second practice. Marcus was able to use them strong arms, and he was able to dodge, and he was able to get around them. One thing that really intrigues me, though, is that Meyer Shank Racing had a partnership with Andretti last year. Now they have a partnership with Chip Ganassi Racing. I think that overall, when you look at Andretti, we pretty much know them to be big street course guys. Marcus Armstrong himself being someone that finished 3rd at Detroit, so we know that he can run on street courses. I think that taking everything they learned from Andretti last year, now they're going to be able to kind of apply that with Chip Ganassi Racing. That could kind of be a little bit of a shift for someone like an Alex Palou, like you were saying, or I just see that this data is going to be shared really well. And if you've got something where you can get an edge on someone, you've got to use it. And Andretti's always had that edge, especially at St. Pete. So I really like Marcus Armstrong at 11.8 million. I think that's where your heavy value is going to be starting out this week.
Yeah, I think a little further up the board, I was looking at Kyle Kirkwood. I'm going to monitor him and see if he continues that strong practice performance. He looked great earlier today. Also, he's got the chili pepper on the side of the car that adds a little extra speed, I'm pretty sure. And then near the bottom, I was going to say Rasmussen, but William took that one. We have got Foster looked pretty solid at 3.5. Him, I think Ilott you can throw into that bucket as well. He looked all right, and I think with Ilott you're almost guaranteed to score teammate points.
Well said. Any other picks? Any other standouts? Major standouts? And by the way, if we're looking down, it's because we're looking at our phones or we're looking at our apps, by the way.
Yeah.
McLaughlin stood out.
He stood out into a wall, didn't he?
His left front tire by the end of that session.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's you announced the contract extension in the morning and then immediately crash your first session on track. I would say that's a power move.
That is a power move. By the way, there are some questions brewing. We will get to them. So if you do have Q&A, start loading up the chat because we're going to answer it from the top down. So get your questions in. Happy to answer newbie questions about the game, questions about game mechanics. So anything is on the table as long as it has to do with Grid Rival. Let's get into bucketed picks, right? There's kind of, if you really look at the leaderboard on Grid Rival, there's really 3 tiers, and maybe help me set positions, right? There's kind of like drivers 1 through 8 or 9. And then you have, I call it 10 through 17. And then you have 18 to 27.
Very scientific.
Very scientific. So let's call those our 3 tiers.
Big numbers.
Big numbers. Who are you picking from each of those? because I think we'll end and we'll go through hypothetical rosters, but let's be honest. After one practice session, I think any complete roster any of us makes today is probably going to get changed before Sunday.
Some minor adjustments.
Yeah, just a few. Ryan, what about you? Who's your blue chip driver?
My blue chip driver
Recommendation.
It was up until maybe an hour ago. It was McLaughlin. I'm sure they'll get that thing fixed up. I'm not too worried. But yeah, I think McLaughlin out of that top part is the guy I like the most. Either him, probably, or Newgarden. I would not go above McLaughlin. I don't see any situation in which I would have Pelot, Power, or Dixon in my lineup this week. So by process of elimination, it's one of those two, because you can run one of those guys and still. I've been playing with lineup construction, and you can still fit in either Herta, Pato, or Kirkwood too if you run McLaughlin, Newgarden, and have a pretty strong lineup. So I'll say McLaughlin.
Awesome. If we're rolling up this way, I'll go ahead and just throw Pato out there at 21.6, mainly just because of the history that he does have here. I mean, you can see here, I know it's just practice times, we're only at P1, but him sitting here around P5, he is number 5. The signs, you know what I'm saying? The signs are kind of adding up a little bit there. And again, another thing that I have to just kind of like allude to is how his overall just persona and vibe match well with the weather, the conditions, the place itself. So I think he has a lot to prove going in to this race, and I have to just kind of stick with him. He is someone I already have in my lineups, and he's someone that I am definitely probably not going to be removing anytime soon.
Yeah, St. Pete vibes, you're saying.
There he is. Yeah, St. Pete.
Like
we'll call him St. Pato. St. Pato Pete.
St. Pato. William, what about you, blue chip?
Sure. As far as blue chip drivers go, right now I'm probably thinking Kyle Kirkwood. He was pretty fast in the early part of practice where they were mostly on race setups. And then he recorded the fastest time once they went to quality simulations at the end of the session.
Yep.
He's looking pretty strong. I remember seeing him race in some feeder series in Coda years ago, and he was dominant there. And nice to see him make his way up the ladder and have a competitive seat. And I think this series is going to show us a lot. So Kyle Kirkwood, I got him for a few races because I think there's some room to grow there.
Love it. Mike, did you go? Can't remember.
Oh, I didn't go, but I kind of gave away my value pick already. I agree on Pato. Yeah, I think there's competition between Pato, Kirkwood, and Herta. But what I would say is, again, what I said earlier is like Pato has the opportunity for the best on team points. He's a podium contender for St. Pete, and when you get a driver who's ranked 7th in the app right now, having a potential podium slot, you really can't overlook that, right? It's like the opposite of taking like Pelot or Power, right? Where they're already priced in for a podium contention. So what I'm looking for is the podium contender who's not priced as a podium contender. That'll make me stretch my $100 million budget more. Like by not spending that extra money, I could assemble a lineup right now with O'Ward and Kirkwood on it. You know, that right there is just it's like a hair under 42 million or right around 42 million. And there's other drivers further down the grid that are going to have a big value jump, I believe, from their performance at St. Pete. So that's where I'm looking.
Yeah, obviously lots of decisions to be made after qualifying. I will give a contrarian answer because you guys all said anything I would said. So I will give my pick of the top 3. If you insist on signing somebody from the top 3, I would be picking Dixon, Mr. Consistent, for 5 races. If I just want somebody that I know is going to be, potentially a ringer, probably not going to lose me a ton of value, probably not going to make me a ton of value, but at least still has upside. Again, Pelot, Power, it's going to be hard for them to earn money. And if you're new and you haven't yet dove into how fantasy points are scored with INDYCAR, you just got to remember there's more that matters than race finish position and qualifying position. There's overtakes, there's the best on team points. So if we talked early on about Nolan Siegel has a race where he finishes in like 5th, he could easily rank #1 in fantasy points, even if Alex Palou goes first quali and finishes the race first. So just want to think about that if that's not something that you know yet about this game. But anyways, that's what I'm saying. If you really want like call it a blue chip plus player, right? A top 3, I'd go with Dixon. Let's move to mid pack, right? And let's call that let's just call it 10 through Connor Daly. So 10 through 18. And we can't pick Nolan. We've already talked about Nolan.
I
Who's
can
your
kick it off
Yeah.
easy by just going ahead and letting you know right now that Connor, and it's not a bias by any means. It's literally just from what we saw in practice too. I mean, he was up there in P4. He's got a new sense of confidence coming into this year. It's officially announced that we've had or that he is going to be with Junkos Hollander. That's kind of like set in stone. So that peace of mind right there going into this opener, he wasn't here last year. That right there lets me want to go ahead and just say, you know what, if I can go ahead and scoop him up at 6.2 million right now, he's got something to prove. He's coming in hot. He knows kind of where he's at right now in the series. That's a guy right there that when you're talking about the way that the point system is, best on team, that looks good. Overtakes looks good. I mean, we saw what he could do on the ovals. I definitely think he can get some passes here. So don't sleep on Connor.
I'd agree. I think in terms of potential upside, pretty significant. Potential upside, pretty significant. If today's a good indicator, 100%.
Yeah, but what I would say here, though, is just to keep in mind is that, this group of drivers is where you have your talent driver eligibility, right? So for everyone new to the app, that's that star next to those drivers. So any driver worth under $18 million is talent driver eligible. And what that gets you is double points. So it acts like you have a 7 driver lineup instead of a 6 driver lineup. So when you're looking at, and even if you have that driver under contract, if they go above 18 million, then they're no longer talent driver eligible. So I am actually going to go right at the top with Marcus Ericsson at 17.4. You could do a 2-race contract. There's a really good chance, like right now he's 10th on the app. I think he'd be a top 10 finisher. So you might be able to carry him for two races as a talent driver, as potentially a top scoring talent driver. But if he does have an outsized performance at St. Pete, which he very well could, then he'll not be talent driver eligible if he breaches 18 million. But that's okay, in my opinion.
Marcus Ericsson was the very first name I clicked on. He was the first add to the team, and clicked the star shortly after. And I'm doing one race. I think he's going to look really good on Sunday. I think he's going to be out of that talent driver range by Monday morning. So I signed him for one race, and he was the very first name I clicked right away.
Yeah, I agree. There's a very good chance of that.
Let's go to the questions before we move on. I don't want to leave people hanging. Lee Page, I hope you're still on the call. So when you use a driver for 2 weeks and then he drops off, do you receive how much he cost back into your bank? Is that how I understand it? Incorrect. You will receive how much he is worth when he drops off. And so that's kind of going to answer the next question I see. But really, the main goal of the game is you got to build team value, right? You need to accumulate as much fantasy points as possible. That's obviously how you win. That's how you beat the people in your league. The way that you're going to do that is by building the most value in your team over the course of the season, so you can have the most stacked team. And there's only one way to do it, and it's by signing a contract. Let's just use an example. We were talking about Connor, right? Let's say what is he at?
He's at 6.2 million right now.
That's 6.2. Let's say you sign him for 3 races and he crushes it, right? And he goes to 9.2. That's a $3 million gap. When that contract is released, that 3 million, the whole amount that he's worth at that point, will get released back to your bank. So when you go to fill that position again, you now have $3 million more. Now, keep in mind, the inverse of that can also happen. And that's what we're going to talk about. You want to be careful signing drivers that you think might be overvalued. I think one of those people right now is the guy at the top, just because it's going to be, he can go up. It is possible to exceed 30 million. It's really hard. So hopefully that answers your question. I think it might answer the next one from CT317. Do contract prices fluctuate after practice? Or maybe a different question. Practice qualifying similar to lines moving at the books. Also, any plans to have your cash game in the state of Tennessee? Contract prices do not fluctuate at all until after the entire weekend event is scored. So driver salaries. So first of all, fantasy points will be updated in real time. If you're watching, you have your phone up, your My Team screen and your results screen will be updating in real time. Your leaderboard eventually will update in real time, but right now your leaderboard and driver salaries get updated typically within an hour of the race being complete. And then your last question, cash games in Tennessee. We have filled out an application, which is the first step of waiting for government to respond and go through a very lengthy process. So we really want to be live in Tennessee. We've had a lot of people asking.
Call your congressman.
Call your congressman.
That's right.
Okay. Let's do a couple more here and then get back into it. Should I be worried if I have a lot of money left over after picking drivers? It depends on what a lot is. If you have 10 million or more left over, probably you might have made a mistake. Or we made a mistake and there's like just too much value on the board. That could be possible, right? If we see qualifying and there's like, Nolan qualifies 5th and Connor qualifies 6th, and there's like all sorts of crazy stuff. Like I could see a spot where like there's a ton of value and you leave a lot in the bank. Most likely that won't happen. That said, everyone on this call, especially at the start of the season, I will bet you probably won't use the whole 100 million, because this concept of gaining value, there is the most upside at the beginning of a season. And that's because it's almost impossible to perfectly price drivers before we see before we see testing, before we see practice, before we see the first qualifying. There's going to be some gotchas, right? There's going to be some people that are just like way off price. Now, usually we're pretty close. We do a lot of research. We look at a lot of data. We look at last seasons. We look at what we know about drivers and their histories. And we're usually pretty close. So there's usually not enough value on the board where you should be going into the first race with, $15 million in the bank. Not saying it's impossible, but I do think most of the experienced players will probably find enough value to where they're going to be picking drivers and it might leave some money on the table. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to that.
I think as constructed, it's entirely possible that the way to gain maximum value, like potentially as much as 12 million, would leave a lot of money on the table. But you'd probably also be leaving a lot of points on the table, where those guys might be earning the most value increase. They may not be earning the most points necessarily. I'll give you a little sneak preview of my lineup right now. I actually do have Palou at the moment because I could swing Palou with the other choices I made.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah, I would say I've done a lot. I've done a bunch of like just mock lineups. And I've ended up kind of 4 to 9 million in the bank consistently. So I saw you put a follow up in that you have 9 million left. Totally possible. If this was our F1 game, I would say you're making a mistake on the INDYCAR game right now for St. Pete. I think having more than 4 million in your bank and less than 10, I'm not calling that a strategy mistake right now. I think there's some value to be had, but I would go a little contrary to William, right? Is like Palou it's very possible for Palou to be a top 3 fantasy points scorer. So you just have to figure out, is that worth $30 million to get a top 3 fantasy point scorer on your team? And just realize that he could have a great weekend and still lose a little bit of value. But if everyone else on your team rose in value, it offsets it and it comes out in the wash. So you have to play Palou or Power or even Dixon appropriately for St. Pete.
Yeah, you don't want to just completely disregard points. Points still are very important. The standings are sorted on points. It's like, for example, when I talked about Ericsson, like that's purely a points play. Like he's the talent driver, double points. I only signed him a 1 race contract. Like I don't really care about any value I get whatsoever from him. I just want as many points as possible. And then, I'm doing a little bargain hunting at the bottom, like assuming that I can hopefully gain a little value if I play my cards right. And then even like McLaughlin's not a huge value play. I think he has room to rise a little bit, but I'm not expecting to gain a ton of team value by rostering McLaughlin. That is more at the bottom. So you do have to balance it a little bit. And early season, it sways a little more towards value than points in my mind. But do not forget about points. You should be rostering at least 90 million in salary. I would argue probably 95 would be my floor. But yeah, just depends.
The IndyCar season right now is a bit more of a sprint than a marathon. There's only 17 chances to score points,
For sure.
and they all matter. You don't want to be the baseball team that had a terrible April and they missed the playoffs by 2 games.
Well said.
Yep.
Cinematic Firefly. Admittedly, I tuned in late, but I'm super confused as to how to increase my team budget. I think we answered that if you're still there. Joe Brugroletta said, I hope they explain the credit a bit if your team underperforms. I'm not sure.
Salary floor.
He's talking about the salary floor.
Oh, got it. When do you guys want to take that?
Okay,
Sure, I'll volunteer for that. So what happens is, if you have a contract expire and your team value, so that's your contract value plus what's in your bank, if that's below 100 million and you have a contract expire after a race, we're going to bump you back up to 100 million so you can still assemble a competitive lineup. So that's what that's all about. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully you're gaining value and we don't have to pad your bank, but that's
But
a little safety net.
The one thing I will add where we do get some questions and confusion around this is it's not based off of it's not necessarily based off of team value. It's possible that your team value might dip below 100 and you won't get a credit because everybody's still in contract, right? It only happens if a contract is released and you are under $100 million, if that makes sense in total budget. Let's see. Lots of comments, shirts, hats. Dustin, he's been more champions. He wants these hats, man. Thoughts on Willie Power?
The sports car race.
Derek, thoughts on Will Power? We kind of discussed Will Power. Will Power, we like Will. Will's a great driver.
Yeah.
Will, if you're listening, look, we're big fans. You're too good for this game this early in the season. So that's what I would say.
Well, if I can give a case for Will Power, then I would say you have a podium contender, you have a very likely top 5 points finisher for fantasy points for less money than Pillow. That's why you sign Will Power. Because that gives you that extra little budget to then when you're making your second or third top choice, maybe you can go one driver up because you've got that additional buffer between him and Pillow. But that's to be said, I'm probably one of the bigger Will Power fans out of the group here, and I will roster him a ton this season, but right now not for St. Pete for me.
There is another thing.
Shenanigans wise, I have to ask Mike: is it because of his shenanigans that he's able to pull?
It's the shenanigans mixed with just like the stoic nature as well. It's just like that.
Yeah,
I get drawn to that the dynamic personalities of like he could be here and he could be here, and you don't know what you're gonna get sometimes. And like, sign me up.
He created a. I feel that he created a meme that lives on 14 years later. So there's that.
Oh yeah.
Now I want to get back to Will Power really quickly. Another case for Will Power. I just kind of did a quick little scan in the IndyCar official league. Of the top 10 drivers, he has the lowest adoption rate.
Oh, wow.
Lowest league adoption rate. So there is a way to set yourself apart, assuming that could change. But right now he was at under 12%, and you have drivers up there like Pillow was 30 plus, Pato was like 50+%. So if you do take Will Power, you're setting yourself apart. If he does finish on the podium, he does look great, you are going to have a leg up on the competition.
League adoption is a statistic that you can see on every driver profile. So if you're in your driver screen and you tap a name, it'll open their profile, show their league adoption, which is basically a percentage of how many other people in your league have that driver on their team. I was going to say, on the topic of Power is an Indy 500 winner, right? So let's talk about that for a second. We have this thing in the game called the one race rule. For those of you who haven't played, right? When a contract ends, you cannot sign that driver again for one race. So very important to think about. Anybody that you're thinking about rostering for 5 races, the 500 is the 6th race. Just keep in mind, you can't use them for the Daytona, for the Indy 500. So if you're thinking, hey, I want Newgarden. I mean, let's say the three-peat in the Indy 500 is probably not super likely, but he's won it twice in a row. Let's say you want Newgarden for the Indy 500. Don't put him on a 5-race contract, right? Put him on anything but, so that he won't be on that cool-off period for that event.
I like 4. I think 4 is good.
4 is good.
The best way. Pretty much every driver that I have, I don't have more than 4 races just because I want to kind of keep an open mind for
Totally.
the Indy 500.
100%. That's like I said, I rarely do 5. I mean, I have to have a lot of conviction. Like I said, I signed Nolan for 5, but like, you know, I may trim that back to 3 or 4 based off of what happens in qualifying and practice. So we'll see. TJ, so you could lose money if a guy goes down during his contract. Absolutely, you can, for sure. It happens all the time. It happened to me all year last year. Let's see. Just trying to get any more questions. A bad idea to have more than one driver from each team. This is a really interesting question with IndyCar. You know what? I'm going to say less impactful. I don't know. William, what do you think? I feel like this is a good William question.
Yeah, so that bonus for being best on your team is 5 points, which is not a lot. It's more like another finish position or 2, basically, or a couple of overtakes. So it's something, but it's not something that's going to swing my decisions in a huge way. I guess it technically brings your ceiling slightly lower if you have 2 drivers on the same team, but I'm not really worried about it. My current lineup has 6 different teams represented, but that wasn't really a conscious effort. That's just
Yeah,
how
to
it
me,
ended up.
to me, it feels like less of a thought in NASCAR and Indy than maybe in F1. You know, I feel like I don't know, for whatever reason in Formula One leagues when I'm signing 2 drivers on the same team, they're just the cars are so similar. It's like if one has a power unit failure, the likelihood that the other one might be having a similar issue is really high. So like I tend to in my Formula One leagues try to diversify that a little bit. And then in F1, you also have the constructor component too. So like you got to, I think you've got to diversify a little bit more, but I do think to William's point, it's going to be less of a potential negative correlation to have 2 drivers on the same team in IndyCar is my gut.
Yeah, it's nothing more than like a tiebreaker for me. I would never not roster someone because I have their teammate, but if I'm between one guy or the other and I think they're dead even and I have one of their teammates, then I'll probably go the other direction, but I don't foresee myself really being too scared about any of that.
And I would say, like, if you're super bullish on Andretti or McLaren, because we've mentioned a lot of Andretti and McLaren drivers, like for St. Pete, I would not scoff at 2 drivers from the same team. You know, even on the Andretti side, 3 drivers from the same team is not crazy with how they're priced right now. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Bob D at the bottom. By the way, we're getting close to the bottom of questions. So if y'all have questions, make sure and get them in. Bob D says, so is the goal to gain value towards the beginning of the season in order to have a stacked lineup to gain max points? Bob, you have been paying attention. That is very much the goal. And, you know, this is the first year of IndyCar on Grid Rival. We have ran simulations upon simulations of last year to make sure we're feeling really good about the point system and how salaries fluctuate and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it is the first year. And I think we're going to learn a little bit about when in the season we see some of these transitions happening. But we will say, you know, in F1 leagues, it kind of, there tends to be this moment where you pass it's usually 125 million, somewhere in there, where you kind of need to start thinking about points because it just gets harder and harder to drop below that. But F1's also a lot more predictable sport. And so I think with IndyCar, it might end up being harder to hold on to value over the course of the season, and we'll see. But generally speaking, if you do get lucky or you're great at this game and you get your team to a spot where you're about 115, 120 million, I think you're definitely going to be wanting to pivoting towards focusing on points, in which case that will be the time where probably do want to start looking at the top of the leaderboard a lot more.
Now, I don't know that we're going to see drivers stabilize the way they tend to in F1. Usually, F1 about a quarter of the way through the season, the values relatively stabilize. Look at IndyCar last year. Look at Colton Herta last year. Like the first half of his season versus the second half of his season. Like he was just up like a rocket the back half of 2024. So you're going to get that in IndyCar a lot more often than F1 if you're familiar with our F1 game. So yeah, the unpredictability, we've seen this mentioned in the chat a few times. The wide variety of winners, podium contenders in IndyCar, that's going to keep things interesting all year, I think.
Yeah, and if you played our NASCAR leagues game last year, you saw it is very hard to really increase that budget. Like the F1, you had so many people, 130, 140. Like the NASCAR top team budgets were in that 120 range, and even that was extremely high. I expect Indy to kind of fall in the middle of the two.
Gary K asked, probably a William or Michael question, how are you going to handle the double race weekend in Iowa? Guessing it's going to be 2 events.
Yeah, so that's a doubleheader weekend. And as far as I know, the plan right now is after that first Iowa race, we're going to lift lockdown ASAP, like once we have results in, and you're going to have a window to change your lineup before that second race, which is the next day. So if that's a concern, we'll probably try and put out reminders as we get closer to that doubleheader, saying, okay, there's a doubleheader. You can set your contract length so that you cover both races, or you can get in there in that gap between the two races and replace anybody who might roll off. So yeah, the plan is there's 2 separate races, so we treat them as 2 separate races, and that does mean a tight turnaround for all of us, both players and game operators.
Yeah. But I don't want to get into Iowa strategy. I've given it some thought. I think the move is going to be to sign your drivers to cover both races and then pay a drop fee based on what happens in race 1 if you have to be able to just have the most nimble lineup. Otherwise, the app will come out of lockdown, go right back into lockdown with the same team is how I'm imagining I'll give a lot of strategy advice once we get to Iowa, and just pay a drop fee if you need to make one change.
At that point in the year, like there's my oval guys that I'm going to want, and so I'm going to want them for both of those oval races.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't get caught in the mix where half of them are where you can't get your guy for the next race. That would be a terrible time. So you got to stack up for the oval boys.
Yeah, I would think if you like someone in Iowa race 1, you're probably going to like them in Iowa race 2.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what if one of the drivers is a vampire and they can't race during the day but only at night? What then?
Who do we have? Who's the most pale-skinned driver in the garage? That's what we've got to figure out now.
Yeah, Chase,
you got the wheels turning, dude.
Yeah, Chase, you got to do some boots on the ground research at St. Petersburg and get back to us.
Oh, big bet. I'll be down there tomorrow evening. So we're going to be leaving early this morning or later tonight, one or the other. So it doesn't take too long for us to get over that way. So I will definitely have some boots on the ground report. So be following along on X and Instagram.
I like it. 9th Gen CA asked, how did the picks game work? The picks game is a daily fantasy game for real money. It's available in 25 states, and it works very, very easily. If we had a podcast on how to play picks, I think it'd probably be about 4 minutes long. You literally pick whether you think a driver is going to finish above or below any of the statistics that are shown. Right now, it's, I think, just race finish position, but as the season goes on, there's going to be qualifying and a bunch of different things. So, like, do you think Pato, if I'm looking at the board, look, willpower position 5.5, right? So do you think Will's going to finish 5th or higher or 6th or worse? And then there's also matchups, right, where you compare drivers head to head. So there's only 2 right now up for St. Petersburg, but like willpower, Colton Herta head to head. Which one do you think is going to finish higher? That's how it works. You have to make at least 2 picks to play. If you get both right, you win 3 times your money. You can make up to 8 picks, and you'll win 100 times your money if you happen to get all 8 of those right. So that's how the picks game works. Let's see. Cinematic Firefly with another question. What are all the things that influence points? Great question.
You missed one. You missed Bob D's question. Overtake
Bob
points.
D. Are overtake points based off of passes for position or total positions? Definitely total positions. So it's the gap between the driver's qualifying position and their race finish position, not their grid start. Although it's usually very similar in IndyCar.
Yeah.
Unless somebody has like an engine penalty or something, yeah, they'll be the same. But yeah, so positions gained from qualifying, which is another wrinkle as we go into this weekend. If one of these front runners has a problem tomorrow in qualifying and they have to start at the back, that's somebody potentially worth grabbing if you think they can make their way back up to the front, because that's more opportunity to score those points.
Yes. And that brings us to the next question. By the way, if you're listening and you're in a league and you have not clicked the little gear icon in the top right-hand corner, click the button. There's all sorts of good information in there, including a tab called scoring, where it breaks down all the different ways fantasy points are earned. I'll answer them quickly. So race finish position is obviously the strongest, right? If you finish first, you can get up to 100 points. And then it goes all the way down to 33rd place, gets 19 points. Second is overtake points. So again, we just talked about that's net gap between qualifying and race. You get 3 positions per point. And then we have something called improvement points, which is an algorithm that we created. Improvement points were designed to really, if we're honest, award mid-pack and back-of-pack drivers for having kind of above average, abnormal race finishes. And what we mean by that is, like, we could probably all agree, somebody in a lower ranked car, call it like a Dale Coyne car, finished a race in 4th place, right? That's probably more of an accomplishment than Alex Palou finishing in 2nd or 1st, right? And so that dude should get a lot of fantasy points. And so the way that we score that is we take a driver's 8 race average, and if they finish above that, and to what amount they finish above it, they will be awarded improvement points. So that's improvement points. There's beating teammates. So we talked a little bit about that earlier. You get 5 points if you're the number 1 driver on your team. And then there's completion points, because I think sometimes we all know in racing, it's just an accomplishment to get to the end. So you get 3 points for every 25% of the race finished. And then laps led. So you get points based off of the number of laps led. If it's over 80%, you get 15 points, and then it goes down from there. So those are the 6 ways in IndyCar, and you can find those again in your settings tab in your league. Let's see. Do you guys plan to go to any IndyCar races? I think Chase just answered. He'll be there this weekend. As far as the Grid Rival guys, we would love to. We don't know yet.
I'd love to make it to at least one this year.
For sure.
I live in the middle of Texas. There's nothing really that close to me this year, unfortunately. Might have to wait for Arlington next year.
Yeah.
Oh, another good question. I'm glad people keep asking this on these shows. Olivia says, let's say we sign a driver for a few races. If he were to get hurt and have to miss a race or two, how would that work as far as, our contract? Would that driver just be replaced on our team who fills it in? That's exactly what happened. If there's a temporary change, meaning a driver's sick, they're out for a weekend, they're racing in Le Mans, whatever it is, whoever fills that seat will earn points for you on that contract, right? If it's a permanent change or a team change, right? Let's say a driver leaves one team and goes to the other, then we cancel the contract and we automatically remove it from your team. You're given a refund, and then that spot's open and you can fill it. So kind of depends on the circumstance, but your guess is exactly right in the circumstance that there's a substitution. Bob D, are drop fees, contract early termination fees, the same for all contracts, or do they fluctuate depending on the driver? They do not fluctuate. That is a frequently asked feature. And on that note, we do have a feature board. It's at feedback.gridrival.com, where you can vote on features or propose new ones. But please, for the love of God, read through the ones that are there before you write a new one. But that is on there. I know for a fact people want to see a kind of escalating drop fee for, if there's 5 races left. I think the argument is it should be more to drop it than if there's one. Right now, it's flat. It's 3% across the board of the driver's current salary. So drop fees are going to come into play quite a bit, I think, if you're really strategic about this game. And it's really easy to drop a driver who's 4 or 5 million, right? Because it's going to be a small fee. But sometimes when you have drivers that are up at the top 30, 25 million, you got to be really strategic about when to take advantage of that, and why. Another question from Olivia: can we play the picks and matchups game if we are in a state that doesn't allow it? Definitely not.
Unfortunately, no.
Unfortunately, no. And basically, it doesn't have to do with whether your state necessarily allows it. It has to do with whether your state allows it, and we have a license to operate there. So a lot of people have been asking about Indiana. And we are working to get live there. Indiana is one of the most strict states in the country to get the type of license required for us to run that game. So we desperately want to be there. It is something we are working towards. But anyway, so it has more to do with where we are licensed and what state allowed, like the intersection of those two things, than just whether or not the state you're in allows it. Let's see. The boys racing. So if pole is penalized and start in the back, they get points for moving forward.
No.
Ew.
So if you qualify on pole and then you have to go to the back because you changed an engine or something, we still treat it like you qualified first. So you're not
Yeah.
going to have the chance to gain those overtake points. That's
And so
something
a lot
that
of
comes
people-
up a lot in the F1 game. That's less common in INDYCAR.
And-
it's
and just-
non-existent in,
And just for what it's worth, we've tested both models in the past. It's been a long time since we had the other one, but a lot of people will hear that and be like, "Well, that's unfair. He's out to the back of the grid," but he's still getting all the qualifying points for getting first place in qualifying. So either way you do it, there's a bit of a trade-off. But your summation is correct. It doesn't matter where you start for overtake points. It matters where you qualify, regardless of penalties or anything like that.
What William was saying earlier, which I think might have been what you were thinking about, is say Alex Palou just has a bad qualifying and is starting at the back of the grid. You might want to jump on signing Alex Palou after qualifying to get,
like he has a spin, like he brushes the wall in Q1, or like he spins and causes a red flag and he gets his time deleted, which is a thing in IndyCar for those unfamiliar. If you cause a red flag, they take your qualifying time away.
So we're through all of the questions we have for now. The next topic at hand was talent driver discussion. Again, tough with only one practice session. Do you just pick the highest guy, Marcus Ericsson? Underneath him, you got Rossi, Santino Ferrucci, Rosenquist, Armstrong, and then all the way to the bottom. I think we've talked about Siegel and Daly. Like, if those guys are really underpriced as we think, like, would you pick one of them over somebody like a Marcus Ericsson?
And I think this is a good time to like really hit home the fantasy points concept, right? So let's actually take an example of Ericsson versus Daly. If Daly finishes behind Ericsson in the race, so let's say they come in 9th and 10th, Daly is going to outscore Ericsson in fantasy points because he's starting so much further back on the grid rival grid, right? He's going to get more improvement points. There's more bonus points that are going to go to him. It won't be by much. Well, it depends on a couple of factors. It won't be by much, but like that's how to hit it home, right? Is like that could very well happen. But for talent driver selection, I definitely have my eyes on Ericsson for a very, very short contract, 1 or 2 races. Because I believe that he might not be talent driver eligible for too much longer. So I don't have a unique take there at the moment.
What about you, Chase? You got a unique take?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, the way that I'm looking at it is when I go to get a talent driver in IndyCar, I want the 2-car teams. I don't want a 3-car team driver there, because I just want to go for who's the veteran, who's got the most experience, get that, and you're locking in an extra 5 points. That's kind of the way that I'm framing it. And when you look in that mid tier right there, you've got a couple of those teams: Meyershank Racing, Felix Rosenquist, Marcus Armstrong, AJ Foyt, Ferrucci, Malukas. Connor Daly's there, and then you're gonna have Stingray Rob down kind of in the bottom barrel of some of the real deep budget drivers. So it just kind of when I'm looking at it for this week, I'm either looking at MSR or I'm looking at AJ Foyt, or you could even go to look at Ed Carpenter Racing. Alexander Rossi's right there, 16 million. But I want to get those double points, and I want to keep that as close to 10 million as possible. And that's the kind of way that I'm framing this up. So again, you can kind of like put 2 and 2 together on that, and like literally put 2 and 2 together. The 2-car teams, that's what you want to focus on. That's the way that I see it. That's my perception of it.
I like it. Any other takers on talent driver? Ryan, William?
I think I was already really boring. I gave my take earlier, and it's Ericsson. And I gave the bold claim. I was like, he's the first name I clicked, so I feel like I have to stick with it. I can't give a different opinion at this point.
And so my talent driver at the moment is Christian Rasmussen.
Whoa.
Apologies to Alexander Rossi. I'm a huge Rossi fan. I'm taking your teammate. So Rasmussen right now is 23rd, I guess, as far as his improvement index.
Hmm.
So for the start of the season, we rank the drivers and we base the improvement points off the rankings. As they have race finishes happen, we start to base it off of average finish position instead. Right now, his quote average is 23rd. So even if he finishes 12th, that is a massive improvement point haul. So I'm chasing that with Rasmussen. My mind could get changed. Like if let's say Connor Daly, I heard his name brought up. If he has a huge practice and a good qualifying tomorrow, maybe I go that route instead with the talent driver. Daly currently ranked 18th. So if one of those guys at the back really impresses, at the back of our rankings, I should say, if one of those guys really impresses, I'm jumping on that train probably. Cal Milot, TJ just mentioned Cal Milot. He's another one I found intriguing. And if we see good things from Ilot tomorrow morning, I think that it's perfectly reasonable to take Ilot. Prima is a brand new team, which is my one hesitation with him, just because
Mm-hmm.
new teams, like sometimes there's kinks to shake out with like strategy decisions or something with the car prep that goes funny just because it's a new organization. And Prima, like they've been operating in other series forever, but anytime it's new, there's just a tiny bit of pause. But I think they are going to prove themselves pretty quickly.
Can I make a prediction?
Go right ahead.
So, if you're right on this talent driver selection, my prediction would be your username is going to be on the top 100 in the global leaderboard after St. Pete.
And that's what Rasmussen.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah, I'm
possibility.
glad
If
that you said that, 'cause
Williams
I
right.
talked about
Williams
him on
right.
that show we did.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
did talk about him, and so I'm glad to see him P11 right here in his first practice. So I do
Yeah.
have a crystal ball, by the way. It is right here.
Let's see. Bob, Ben Scrubs. Bob answered Ben's question, but we'll get to it. Lineups aren't locked until the race start.
That's
We
right.
can
They
get-
don't lock
we can-
until race start.
His
And we
question
don't
was
do
we can. Yeah,
we
we don't get.
do qualifying points for IndyCar. I'll just answer the question. Like
There
we
you go.
don't do qualifying points for IndyCar, so that's why we don't lock until the race. Our F1 game we give qualifying points. IndyCar, NASCAR, we don't do that.
And I think the confusion here it was our discussion again about gaining points from your qualifying position. It's
Yeah.
you're gaining points from your qualifying position from the net positions gained between your qualifying finish position and your race finish position. So if you had a bad qualifying, you're not getting points for qualifying. But if Alex Palou doesn't set a time for qualifying and you sign and you have Alex Palou in your contract for the race, he will get all the overtake points. So if he finishes at, in P1, that's going to be a massive points haul. And it should be because he's going from the back of the grid all the way through traffic to get to the front.
Mhm. Yeah.
He can do it.
Yeah, that is going to be an interesting dynamic that doesn't exist in the F1 game. Is
Place differential potential. We have arrived.
for sure. We may regret, everything that we've said about not signing Alex Palou if he somehow has a rough qualifying and ends up 18th and then finishes in first.
Being on a street horse, one yellow flag at the right time or the wrong time, depending on your perspective, it could change everything. Track position is going to be everything in St. Petersburg, I think.
And it is worth noting that basically everything, everything we said today could be completely meaningless by the end of the day tomorrow. If we practice and qualifying, like I will potentially change my whole entire lineup. And I'm sure these guys will too. Like if Palou for some reason is starting 30th, then guess what? He's on my team. Like I said, I wouldn't roster him earlier, but you never know.
But for the
30th place in a 27 car field, that would be impressive.
Yeah.
You have done that.
But this is good also for like all you league admins in the chat. Send this video in your league chat to your league mates because everyone has casual players and casual friends, right? So like the advice that we gave is at least good general advice, right? They're gonna, if they follow the advice, the theory of the advice or the direct recommendations we made, they probably do okay. For the super competitive folks who are waiting until every car is off the track after last practice session to even think about your lineup, maybe our direct recommendations right now could use a little fine tuning.
Let's close with our drivers to stay away from. Can we
Okay.
confidently speak to any yet? Is it too early?
It's never too early. It's never
Yeah,
too early to
yeah.
talk that talk, dude. I mean, I'll start. I just want to say this much. I mean, just from what I'm seeing here, you know, it's tough to it's tough to say because we have just Friday practice. P1's here. Not everybody has you know, P2 practice yet, and that's fine. But from what I know that I saw today, the main thing that I know to be true and that I kind of knew to be true going into here is that you want to pump the brakes with at least one or two guys. And if I have to look at that, I'm going with Graham Rahal as one
I was
of
just
them,
going to
just
ask about
because.
how he did in practice.
Yeah, so he in practice, I mean, nothing really out of the ordinary for him. He was P20 and P1. You know, the times they have a lot of transitional stuff going on right now, but there just hasn't really been. I feel like he's older. He's got these younger guys now coming into RLL. Like Louis Foster looked really good. I'm kind of high on Louis Foster this year, but this is not what we're talking about now. But Graham Rahal, I just feel like there's like this consistent like I don't want to sound mean, but like a consistent mediocrity that's there, but it's because of how long he's been there. He kind of knows that like he's a little bit more in the business mind, maybe not so much you know, like trying to just be that driving force on all ends. He's doing what he can. But Graham Rahal is one guy that I'm probably going to be staying away from. And then the other guy is probably going to be, and because it's just simply because I don't know him, Robert Schwartzman. We need to wait a little bit to
Mm,
see what is going to transpire here. He's with Prema,
yeah.
so just gonna take some time on that one.
Yeah. I have an interesting kind of take on this because I have like three pairs of drivers that I'm staying away from. And it's not necessarily because of those drivers, it's more of just where they fit in with price. And those pairs are it's first Ferrucci and Rosenquist, just because they're 14 and 13, 14 and 13 million. I would rather at that range pay a little extra for a talent driver who I think is great, or I'm just going to save money and go down the board. The other pair, we talked about Ray Hall, but Ray Hall and Malukas, just because they're 10 and 9 million, at that point, I would rather just go down to Siegel Daily, save a little money for guys who I think could have very similar performances. And then the last two, this is a common thread, VK and Simpson, who are both at 4.8. At that point, I'm just going to sign some of those guys at 3.5, hoping for a little more value grab. And guys who I think might actually outperform them, but at the very least be similar enough to not warrant paying an extra 1.3. So that's where I'm at with them. It's not necessarily anything personal against the drivers. It's just where their prices are and where I think there might be more value either slightly above or slightly below them.
And
Yeah.
Ryan, question. I zoned out for a second as I was looking something in my app to fact check something. Did you mention Malukas at all?
Yeah, I lumped him in with Ray Hall as very similar kind of candidates.
And you okay? So this has been on my radar because he has a tremendous league adoption. 40% of players are have Malukas on their lineups right now.
Popularity, baby.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's fine by me.
Yeah.
Rock and
It's-
roll. Where's Willpower? Where you at, baby? You know what I'm saying?
We'll end with this. If you want to play this game by picking who you like the most, that's perfectly acceptable, and you will have plenty of fun. We have worked very hard to make Grid Rival a game where you can do that and still have a great time, but also so that it has enough depth to where if you're one of the people on this call that's probably maybe building a spreadsheet, thinking about, both work. And I will tell you of the four other three gentlemen here that work at Grid Rival, Chase is new to us this year, so we're going to see how strategic he plays. But of the four of us at Grid Rival, I am the least strategic, right? I shoot from the hip. I look at a couple charts every time. I think about maybe who's undervalued. I'm not in the top 1,000 of all of our players, and last year there was like 100,000, so it's hard to be in the top 1,000. But like, in my own league of 10 of my close friends, I think I finished second. So I do okay. You can do okay. Just having fun, following your gut, picking who you think is who's gonna do well. You don't have to obsess. If this game seems like it's overwhelming or has a level of complexity that seems like crazy, you don't have to overthink it. So, any thoughts there, Michael? It sounds like you had something you want to say.
Well, I did make it into the top 200 out of 100,000 last year.
Yeah.
My highest finished yet, and I won 3 leagues. I broke out a spreadsheet twice on just making a critical decision for an overtake in a league to get from second to first to like cinch the win at the end. So you don't. And the thing that I say as we do these streams is that it doesn't matter if you play it like chess or checkers, right? This is racing. Things are going to happen. There's you, like Chase said, unless you have a crystal ball, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
Call me. Parse
yeah.
the JSON, get the hybrid theory going. I like Ross's hybrid theory. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
So sometimes you got to trust the gut. Sometimes you got to parse a JSON. It's
Yeah.
just how it
That's
works,
right, man.
you know?
All right. On that note, it's been an hour. So, for all of you that have been here the whole time, we thank you for joining in. We hope that we've helped. If this is a new game for you, we want y'all to have the best experience possible. So, we will be doing these shows as often as we can. Usually, probably not on Friday. We'll probably usually do them earlier in the week, in advance of every race. If you want to help us out, invite your friends. Start your own league. If you're in a big one, start your own. And we look forward to exchanging more communications and talking to y'all more during the season. So thanks for joining. Enjoy St. Pete, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. We're good. Let me stop in Riverside. Chase, thanks for joining.